Good evening and welcome to the new school. My name is Katharina Grosse. I run the Vera List Center for Art and Politics here. And I am here to claim the privilege of the host to express on your behalf and on behalf of the new school our great delight and deep honor to be hosting this talk with Sam Durant tonight. We're thrilled to have him here in New York tonight. There are few artists whose work occupies such key positions in contemporary public discourse, and I really want to emphasize that it's public discourse, it's not just the art discourse. There is Durant's extensive body of work on the notion of what a monument is constituted of. His mining of the language of political propaganda is well known. His work as an educator at Cal Arts or in collaboration with numerous other artists is incredibly influential. Sam also works as a curator. Exhibitions, some of which have been seen here in New York, for instance, the exhibition on Black Panther artist Emory Douglas that was presented at the New Museum. Accumulative, and each one of these different initiatives together have made us realize, at least in hindsight, that this artist really has shifted the paradigms of how art is produced, perceived, and the impact that it has in regular public and political life. At the Vera List Center, I had the pleasure of working with Sam on an exhibition called Ours, Democracy in the Age of Branding, which included numerous other artists. The exhibition examined the influence of consumerism on notions of citizenship and aptly ended with one of Sam Durant's seminal light pieces. This one was entitled See You in Chicago in August. And the show, mind you, was presented 2 months before the election of Barack Obama. I don't mean to ascribe any gifts of or the power of the clairvoyant to Sam, but perhaps something almost like it, a visionary artist who helps us chart contemporary life. It is now my pleasure to thank the Public Art Fund for this evening. As you all know, I think it's been a long collaboration between the Vera List Center and the Public Art Fund. And I'd like to ask Nicholas Bohm, the Director-in-Chief Curator of the Public Art Fund, to introduce Sam. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Pam, and the team here at the New School, who are always extraordinary hosts and provide us with this magnificent venue for our talk series. And it is, I think, an exciting new edition, the first in our spring series, which we're calling Encounters, Artists, Cities, and Communities. This series actually will bring us 3 different artists, or 4, if we concede one is a duo, all engaged in very different ways with urban spaces and the communities that inhabit those spaces. On May 7th, Katharina Grosse, whose really remarkable installation is at Metrotech right now, just 2 of us, a Public Art Fund commission. And then on May 20th, Elmgreen and Dragset, the duo that I mentioned. So I hope you'll come back and join us for those. I've known Sam for many years. Actually, I think I realized nearly 15 years. I met him pretty much, I became aware of his work soon after I first moved to the US and began working at the Wadsworth Atheneum in Hartford. It was clear to me that Sam was really an exceptional artist. He is interested in radical ideas about art and art history, but not in isolation from the rest of the world, as Karen observed. His work's always about making connections between how we experience the world and the forces that shape that experience, cultural, social, and political. We actually worked on an exhibition. I invited Sam to do a project in the Matrix series at the Wadsworth Atheneum, And he developed a really remarkable body of work, which I think went on to become sort of a signature body of his. He used the gallery space, but he also used the facade of the museum and brought together the language of protest and the language of advertising in a really remarkable way. And actually, in discussing just before the lecture tonight, I think that was actually Sam's very first public work. Given the themes and materials of his work, I think that public engagement is a sort of very natural step for him. And he's obviously continued to work in galleries and museums, and also to think deeply about public monuments and their meaning. Scaffold, his extraordinary public work commissioned for the last Documenta, reminded me of what Sam's work does so brilliantly. On one level, it was a playful, interactive sculpture that kids couldn't wait to jump on and play on. On another level, it reinterpreted the sort of classical architectural folly, offering elevated views of the surrounding park from the axial perspectives. And on yet another level, it mined the brutal history of public execution, inviting us to think about our own relationship to that history and its legacy. Sam's numerous solo museum exhibitions include LA MoCA, the Kunstverein in Düsseldorf, SMAC in Ghent, not to forget the Southern Hemisphere, the Govert Brewster in New Zealand. He's been featured in the Whitney, Sydney, and Venice Biennales. He's a curator, as Karen also mentioned, and his Black Panther, the revolutionary art of Emory Douglas, was seen here in New York at the New Museum. Most recently, from 2012 to 13, he was an artist in residence at the Getty in LA, where he produced a social media project that I thought was really remarkable called What is a Museum? Sam lives in LA and teaches at CalArts. He shows here, as I'm sure you all know, at Paula Cooper Gallery in LA with Blum and Poe, in Paris with Praz de la Vallade, and at Sadie Coles in London. Please join me in welcoming Sam Durant.
Thanks so much, Nicholas, for that introduction and for bringing me out here. It's great to be working with you again after quite a few years. And thanks to the Vera List Center, to Karen, and the New School for hosting this. It's as one of the esteemed audience members said, it's a very honorable space, and indeed it is. It's quite something to be here on this stage. I will show a few different projects, some with more or less relationship to others, mainly just focusing on work that has some type of public component. The first one I'll start off with is a work that's I did for the Panama Biennale in 2008, and it's called Americas, plural, and it kind of deals with the history of the Panama Canal Zone, and there's this structure is a kind of transposition of the waterway in the canal zone. These are metal panels painted by a local sign painter, and this is basically the metal panels follow this route inside the canal zone, the museum in the canal zone where they had the exhibition. And on the panels, you could see several maps with small didactic panels. So it started with the earliest cartography of European exploration and colonization of the isthmus and the surrounding region. The interesting map here, which is an upside down map. I found a number of maps where you had a kind of antipodean viewpoint, and I thought Nicholas would appreciate that. So there's a whole series of things. This is another section of maps. These maps here I found in the National Library. They were maps used for geography lessons for high school students in Panama. And this white area, this was during the U.S. occupation of the zone, is the Panama Canal Zone. So they just left it blank as a kind of a forbidden zone. And this is the city, the Panama City down here. This is one of the strategic maps for George Bush's invasion of Panama to remove Manuel Noriega. Many of you might remember that. It's a kind of prelude to the first Gulf War. They used that opportunity to test a lot of weapons and things that they would go on to use there in Iraq. These are some various kind of naval charts and naval maps. I was an artist in residence at the Smithsonian Institute, so I spent some time at their Tropical Research Institute in Panama and found some very interesting charts and maps there. These maps show the location. Let me see if we can get that pointer back. There we go. They show the locations of the dumping zones for the chemical and biological weapons that the Navy was developing on the small islands out here. So there's still these zones in the middle where you're not supposed to sail over. This is, in contrast, this is what's called a mola, which is a kind of embroidery applique technique that the Kuna Indians, it's a traditional garment, actually. The women wear it on the as a kind of piece in the front of their outfits, and they're very interesting. While they're sort of indigenous, mainly indigenous kind of symbols and so forth, they often do things like this, and using cartoon characters. You find Bart Simpson and all kinds of Texaco gas station molas and things like that. It was a kind of interesting contrast to the sort of tourist expectations. Another interesting thing that the Kuna Indians did was they were one of the first indigenous groups to achieve territorial sovereignty. So they have in Central America, they have basically a nation in Panama. And one of the ways that they established that was by making their own maps. And I thought these are some of the maps that they made. They worked with international team of geographers to produce their own maps of their own territory in order to make their case for controlling their own land. And it became a very important precedent for a lot of indigenous groups in that region. And to me, this was a really nice example of this idea that you either make maps or you're mapped, and I think that obviously the history of the Americas is one of mainly of people being mapped and being mapped out of existence. And this last image is the guy who painted all these panels, these metal panels. A painter named Oscar Melgar, who's a very famous painter of buses in Panama. If you've ever been to Panama City, they have private buses. They have no public bus system, and the buses compete for riders. And so they have the most incredible paint jobs and sound systems in there. And Oscar apparently is one of the top bus painters. So I was lucky enough to get him to also make a map of the country, and the canal, I think, symbolically the separating of the two continents the making of two, the separation, the border, all these kinds of things, and the history of the U.S. Occupation and then withdrawal, and of course the relationship to global trade and so forth, were a lot of the things that I was interested in that project. And then this is the work that some of you may have seen in Documenta last year that Nicholas referred to, called Scaffold. His description was great, better than I could do, I think. This is an image of it installed in a sculpture park in Scotland after the Documenta, which I thought was an interesting contrast to the situation in Germany. And these kind of images, I think, give it a much more, I don't know, almost filmic presence, kind of silhouetted against the sky, something I hadn't really thought about. Certainly the gallows figures prominently in the Western movie genre. So here's the deck and the underneath of it, which was a lot of fun to climb around on. Yeah, so this sort of archetypal effect, I think. And here you can really see how the legs of the various platforms are kind of floating at different levels. And this is the work installed at Documenta with visitors. So it's a series, and I'll describe a little bit. It's a series of 6 different gallows from U.S. history, a kind of historical compendium. The earliest one being John Brown, and the most recent one, the metal one you see here, was the one used to execute Saddam Hussein in Iraq in 2003, I believe. So there's also obviously an attempt to link capital punishment and prison and state violence with imperialism as well. I wanted to just play, there was also a sound component that you could listen to while you were viewing it if you were equipped with the audio guide or whatever. And this is a poem by a political prisoner named Herman Wallace, who was in solitary confinement for 30+ years in Louisiana. And this is an audio recording that he made of a poem that he wrote.
If death is the realm of freedom, then through death I escape to freedom, which is a quote by Fran Fanon. The title of this poem is A Defined Voice. They remove my whisper from general population to maximum security. I gain a voice. They remove my voice from maximum security to administrative segregation. My voice gave hope. They removed my voice from administrative segregation to solitary confinement. My voice became vibration for unity. They removed my voice from solitary confinement to the supermax of Camp J. And now they wish to destroy me. The louder my voice, the deeper they bury me. I said, the louder my voice, the deeper they bury me. Free all political prisoners, prisoners of war, prisoners of consciousness. Herman Wallace, Anglo Street.
What we did is mixed his sound recording with the sound of children playing. I think you probably noticed in the background, to kind of reproduce in a more visceral way, perhaps, that kind of contrast between life and death. There was a didactic sign up on the gallows so that there's a brief description of the work, and it notes each of the different gallows used in the construction of the sculpture, and directs you to more information for anyone who's interested in that. These are some of the source images that I used. So I worked with an architect because there are no photographs of the John Brown gallows, only a couple of drawings. So we worked from those drawings to try and estimate what the scale of it was and so forth. Same with this. This is the Haymarket gallows, obviously, for anarchist organizers who were convicted in Chicago. I'm sure many of you know about that famous case. And the image, again, from the Hussein execution, that, again, we had to really do a lot of kind of guesswork in a way to figure out what there's some other images as well to figure out exactly what the structure was. The work is currently in The Hague in the Netherlands right now as part of a programming exhibition that goes for this year from 2014-2015 called See You in The Hague. A lot of see you things going on, see you in Chicago, see you in The Hague, which I think everyone in the world understands what see you in The Hague means, except apparently the people in The Hague, So part of what their initiative was, it's an organization called the Stroom, which has been around for a long time, that does public art and architectural projects in the city, is to raise the awareness, apparently, among the local people about the international zone, the international criminal courts, and this is in a little park area adjacent to a couple of the tribunal buildings. They're in the process of building a new campus in the northern part of the city that'll house all the different aspects of the criminal court and the court of justice in one place. They're all kind of spread out in the city right now. And so again, a very different kind of site from the other two. And this is during the opening festivities of this programming. And the curator that I worked with here thought it would be really interesting to have a day of music, of singers, songwriters, performers doing what he calls murder ballads. So there was a kind of a lot of Johnny Cash and being sung that day. And, it was an interesting experience for me because I was very interested in the platform being used in different ways. And, there's a number of different things happening. Amnesty International, their campaign against the death penalty is using the site quite a bit for different activities and programming and so forth. But it was interesting because it never really occurred to me that one of the only areas, especially in the United States, where we can talk about capital punishment and the death penalty is in music. I mean, that's mainly where it's expressed, and that didn't really hit me until I saw this concert series. It was an entire day from, I think, 10 in the morning till 8 at night of one group after another performing songs. So it was quite a kind of just through that sheer repetition, it was pretty remarkable day. And I guess it's a way of both being serious and dealing with the sadness and the hurt and the anger and all the things, the sort of incommensurability of it, but also being able to celebrate in a way as well. And some of the music was very upbeat. So that was also an interesting experience, that you can get this range of emotions, I think. And that was something I was interested in the work from the beginning, was this sort of range of responses to something that's, particularly in the United States, a very difficult thing to deal with as a society. The next project is a very recent one that I did last summer at the Getty Museum. I was invited by the education department to be an artist in residence there and to produce a work that would engage with their audience somehow. And so I proposed a kind of collaboration with them about just what is a museum. And we came up with a number of the people on the education staff were interested in this project, and we kind of brainstormed a lot of things, and we came up with this this idea, what is a museum? And so we came up with a series of questions. And they were, the education staff was very interested in engaging social media. So they wanted to have this, try to do something with Twitter and Facebook and the internet and, various different kinds of digital interfaces. And so, and I'd never done that. I've never done Twitter or Facebook or any of it. So I was interested in trying that and seeing what that was like. I learned very quickly that I'm not interested in social media. It's very difficult and time-consuming, I have to say. So we came up with a series of questions, and they installed these graphics throughout the museum. In there, they have for those of you that haven't been to the Getty, you park down at the bottom of the hill and you ride a trolley, people mover, up to the campus on top of the hill. So that's a very big part of the experience of your visit. And they amazingly allowed the project to be incorporated into the trolley ride. And I think that was a great opportunity for people to, because they had a minute or two to do Twitter. I know you're supposed to do it fast. We took advantage of every opportunity. The cafe had napkins. I think some people might have been a little annoyed by the whole thing, but and then there were these kiosks in the museum where they had like iPads, and you could go on there and answer the questions. And they had set up a kind of website where if you clicked on one of these bars, you would get to respond. And there were some really, as I kind of thought, there were some really thoughtful, interesting responses to these questions. And they had an extraordinary number of responses on this website. I believe it's still up on the Getty's website. So these are just some screen grabs of some of a couple of the different things. This is a good point, and we talked about this, because their brochures, they have brochures there in, I don't know, 5 or 6 languages, maybe more than that. Maybe, there's a lot of languages. So they do it in most of the Asian languages, most of the European languages. but with the infrastructure that they had, they felt that they had to do it, just in English. But I think the comment is that kind of comment is very important. And I'll show you now a proposal for what's called, the title is Proposal for a Public Fountain. And so the idea, I found these two images and put them together. The water cannon and the anarchist protester. So the original location was going to be in Rome, the city of fountains. So this would be, and also obviously no stranger to political demonstrations. So this would be the idea, is to install it in a plaza. And this is a scaled down quarter scale version of what it might look like in the gallery that I work with in London, the Sadie Coles Gallery. So you have a black marble water cannon truck, and then a carved marble figure carrying the flag. You can see the view here. So using traditional materials, fountain materials, using marble to produce the elements. Talk about a project that maybe quite a few of you probably saw a few years ago at Paula Cooper Gallery, my first show there, which was entitled White and Indian Dead Monuments Transposition to Washington, D.C., or a proposal for White and Indian Dead Monuments transposition. So the idea was that I researched monuments around the United States devoted either to white settlers killed in conflicts around territorial expansion, or Native Americans likewise killed in territorial expansion of the United States. This one is from my home state of Massachusetts. It's called the Bloody Brook Monument. Is dedicated to a very early massacre in 1675, when a group of merchants were moving through western Massachusetts, and it was during King Philip's War in the 17th century, and they were all killed by Philip's forces, hence the Bloody Brook. And that was obviously a monument to the white colonists who were killed there, and it's part of this larger group here, which is displayed in a kind of geometric pattern inside the familiar, most beautiful gallery in New York, Paula Cooper space, laid out in a kind of geometric grid. And these are all the monuments to the white settlers. And then down here, in the smaller room, there's a smaller collection. And these are the monuments that were dedicated to the Native American people killed. So you can see that there's a disparity in numbers, and there's also a disparity in the way that I've arranged them. This is a model of the idea, which would be to move all of the monuments from around the country here to Washington, D.C., and line them up along the reflecting pool, in proximity to the granddaddy of all monuments. And you can't really see it in the image, but the group of monuments to Native Americans would be arranged here in the kind of shadow, as it were. And that project was, a very important one for me, and it's had a lot of repercussions in different things that I've done since then. And actually, the most recent work that I've done is a project in St. Louis that's just opened, I don't know, a week ago at the Laumeier Sculpture Center, which is just outside of the city of St. Louis. And this is an image from the Historical Museum in St. Louis of a sculpture done by, it's a bit of an aside, but it's done by a sculptor named Cyrus Dallin, who lived in Boston and at the turn of the century taught at my alma mater, the Massachusetts College of Art. And so I've always had a very, I don't know, a fondness for his work. And you may know the very famous statue that he did in front of the MFA in Boston of the Indian on his horse in the kind of, with his arms outstretched and his head back. And this was a kind of companion piece. He did a series of these kind of memorials to the noble Native American who's been forced to kind of relinquish his land, his livelihood, and himself, really. And so this was installed at their exposition that they had in St. Louis. And, this is the arch. It just occurred to me that there's another arch here. And this is, I think, the project I was invited to the Laumeier to address a theme, which was the theme of historical succession. Mary Lou Canode, the curator there, the director there, had an idea of, looking at the long history of St. Louis. I never knew this, but it's actually, its nickname, which it's had for a long time, is Mound City, because there's an ancient civilization there that St. Louis is built on top of. And they didn't really realize it until fairly late in the game. The Cahokia civilization, which was 3000 BC, so it was quite old. But they had this amazing city, basically, along the Mississippi. I guess the archaeologists figure at one point it had something like 60,000 people living there. Anyway, the Gateway Arch, as you probably know, the famous architect Ariel Saarinen designed it to commemorate westward expansion. It's the Gateway Memorial Arch for Western Expansion is the title, and underneath it is a museum of westward expansion. So it is sort of unabashedly about the colonial march across the continent, and the idea of seeing a kind of negative space through which you see the West, the wide open territory, just waiting to be conquered. This is my first GIF, so I went from Facebook and Twitter to to GIFs. And I think this intersection of monuments and territorial expansion, imperialism, and so forth really came back in this project. And here you really see the explosion of energy around this this gateway. Psychoanalytic terms, I find it very interesting, obviously. And my project was dedicated to this idea that I found. This is a screen grab from the Museum of Westward Expansion's website, where they describe the arch. And it's again interesting. It's a catenary curve, and you make that by holding two ends of a chain. And I just really took these three words, the free hanging chain, seemed so, each of those words has so many connotations if you take it out of the context of, of the sort of monumental and celebratory idea of the Gateway Arch. So there are all kinds of free-hanging chain associations that came to mind, particularly in the South. This was a digital proposal that we're just kind of fooling around with, making different ways of making this catenary curve with chain. This is the grand mound at the Cahokia Park, and this was part of they do have a state or a federal actually park there, preserving what's left of the settlement area, this was an interesting spot because you can see the arch in St. Louis from the top of this mound. But this is actually, it was installed in the trees on the grounds of this sculpture park in Laumeier. So a series of chains were installed way up high in the trees overhead, forming a kind of promenade of successive chains. And I mean, now the trees haven't bloomed yet, so it's maybe relatively more easy to see. I don't know what it's going to change as the leaves come out, but the effect of when the trees move in the wind and you get this very eerie kind of clinking, very soft clinking sound as the chains move and they kind of sway, and there's something very eerie about it. And again, the Gateway Arch is something that is, I mean, it's enormous. So when you go visit it, you're basically, your head is, back. And this has a similar kind of effect, although I think in a way that's not monumental, I hope. And that will conclude my remarks tonight, and maybe we can do some questions and answers if people feel like it.
Thanks. Is that on? So we do have some time for questions. Maybe, Sam, I'll kick off. And clearly your work in general takes on problematic issues, difficult issues on many different levels. And you also have this impulse to do the public projects. And as I've learned over the last 5 years, a lot of expectations around public art tend to be for things that are very affirmative, in a way. And I'm sort of curious, given this sort of very complex and sometimes challenging issues that a lot of your work engages, have you found that to be a challenge in itself, and how do you negotiate that?
Yeah, it is. I feel like I've been very fortunate in my my career. I've had so many opportunities that I sometimes wonder how that happened. Actually, given the nature of some of the things I do. I mean, I think I think you're right. There is definitely a tendency, particularly in the public art realm, towards more celebratory types of things, and that may prove to be more difficult. But there's still people out there doing things like yourself that are supporting things that are a bit more challenging, maybe. So, as big as the art world gets, and as a overwhelming, or what am I trying to say, as I don't know, as closed as it seems to be getting. I think there are still opportunities there. You know, obviously, you do lose chances that you might have had, but then I'm not aware of those. Nobody calls me and said, you know, I was going to give you this, but, you know, your work's just doesn't work, so you're not going to get it. I just don't know about it, so maybe I'm blissfully ignorant. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but there are people out there, like, as I said, like yourself, that you know, that support different things, and I've been fortunate to connect with a lot of them, so.
I guess another sort of related question might be about sort of audience response. And, you know, I'm curious as to whether you sort of approach a public project differently than the way you would a museum or gallery project, and then if you find the way people engage with them to be different, and if there's anything interesting to you sort of about that.
You mean like the difference between a commercial gallery and a public,
right.
more public venue?
Right.
Yeah.
Or even a museum exhibition.
Or museum, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I think you know, each venue, you know, you have a different audience, and they're different. You know, I mean, it's hard to know your audience completely, but you know, there's certain things you can count on in different venues. You know, that said, I mean, some of the things I showed here, in a way, like the public fountain proposal, I couldn't do it in Rome, so I made a model of it to show in a commercial gallery as a way of dealing with that. Or this, you know, the show from Paula Cooper, again, you know, something, I mean, I don't know if I would really actually want to do that kind of a thing, but again, a way of, you know, in a sense, working on in both places at the same time, almost, or using one to support the other. I mean, the project at the Getty was really interesting for me because it was quite different from what I usually do and how I usually work. So that was a real learning experience, and I tried to do something that, in a sense, it's like you try, you know, the institution needs something and you want something, and it was really about trying to find a common ground where those two things could happen. And, you know, yeah, maybe the project was, for me, maybe a little bit too close to a marketing branding campaign, but that's what they wanted, you know, and that's how the project was going to get done. And I felt like, well, even with that, maybe my misgivings about that, there was still the possibility for visitors to really interact and, you know, in a sense, you know, express some ideas about the Getty Center, really. I mean, and because it was broad, like, what is a museum? It wasn't, what is the Getty? I think they could feel comfortable with that. It wasn't so threatening to their program, so, yeah.
Hi, Sam. This might, in short, be like a question about process, but I was a little curious if you could talk more about the relationship between, say, it seems like you have a very research-based process where there's a lot of research involved, but then I'm sort of curious about, say, with the gallows piece, we can sort of see where the research of the different designs of gallows come in, but one thing I'm particularly curious about is maybe this question of wanting to levitate them, right? Having them above the ground, which, you know, maybe is not part of the research, but I'm just sort of curious, could you talk about where sort of certain decisions are made in the research process?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, like with the scaffold, since the, you know, I started out by just making architectural plans to scale, and then I realized they were all different heights, and how do you combine things that are all different heights? And so I just basically decided to use the decks. So they just stack on top of each other's decks. So the ones that are shorter float. They look like they're floating. And that, I think, was in some senses an unintended effect, but I think it worked quite well. It was a kind of a really nice accident that I think strengthened the work quite a bit. You know, I mean, the monuments, white and Indian dead monuments transpositions, it's a bit more flat-footed, I mean, in the sense of these sort of straight, you know, reproductions, scaled-down reproductions of all the monuments. It's not that, it's not a very dynamic work in that sense. So I guess, I guess it's just kind of the luck of the process in a way. Yeah. That's a good point. Maybe I should think about that more. Like, that's, yeah. Anyone else? It's so quiet in here. Should put some music on or something.
On a very, kind of taking a different look, do you see potential for the environment or threats to the environment or the impacts of climate change as a theme for your art in the future, given that what you have shown us is so well anchored in political processes, and I wondered what the potential was for environment being part of that political process.
That's a great idea. I'm going to write that down. That's a really good idea. I hadn't thought about it because I am so, I guess in a way involved in history and social processes, historical social processes. And, you know, of course, climate change is a historical social process, and it's one that I haven't really looked at. But I think I will. I mean, there are a number of artists doing really interesting work, which I'm sure you know, in that area. But yeah, I could see that happening, definitely. There's a few hands up over here. I don't know.
Thank you. I have a question about this piece right here. I think it's remarkable, the subject matter that you take on, and it seems like you have an ease about how you're able to talk about it. And this image of the chains and how it references slavery and I mean, it reminds me a lot of the history of America, the genocide of Native Americans. And my question is about how you present the work. Like how didactic is the presentation? Is there a lot of descriptive information that accompanies this work? And how is it received?
Yeah, I have always tended to be, quite didactic in the sense that there's always some kind of information available for the work.
This seems particularly open, though, just spatially and
oh, yeah.
The whole presentation.
Yeah, no, that's right. And they have in the park, each sculpture has a little plaque that gives you the information. So, which I like those kind of conventions where, and also, I mean, some visitors are not interested in that either. They want to have a more direct experience, a less mediated, whatever you want to say. And that's fine. And then if you have a plaque on the side, you can ignore it. You don't have to look at it. So I think there's enough. I try to get, in other words, I guess I try to get enough in the work that if one doesn't want to know the background or the backstory or whatever, you can discover it, aspects of it at least, without having that. So I guess it's a fine line between, having some kind of poetry, some kind of emotional experience, something that is maybe not purely intellectual, something
Well,
poetic.
this seems like a very haunting work to me,
Yeah,
very beautiful work.
Yeah, something poetic. You got, otherwise it's a history lesson, which I like the idea of, but maybe it's not, it stops being art at that point. I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, when, in the development of your work, when and how do you think about the public? And does that shift from project to project?
Yeah, I do. I guess I always think about the audience, because I guess I do the work, in a sense, for others. And I think the audience is a bit different in different cases. What do I want to say? The piece about the white and Indian dead monuments transpositions, that's primarily for white viewers. But I think Native American viewers can also enjoy it, in a sense. When I did that work, I worked with several artists and curators at the NMAI and the Smithsonian, the National Museum of the American Indian, and for them it was funny. It was like, but it also worked as a kind of affirmation, I guess, So it can work as an affirmation for one audience and a challenge to another audience. And I think like the general public, let's say, whatever that is, quotation marks around, let's say the non-initiated, people who have no training in contemporary art or any kind of art, that's my ideal viewer. And that audience really, because there's no assumptions, they just look at what's there and they get it. I mean, it's really, I think we often get hung up in this idea that you need to know so much about art to get the artwork. I think I've gone in the other direction, and I think that the less one knows, the more interesting the work is, And I think that's true of any artwork, But that's what I'm interested in mostly, yeah.
I have kind of a maybe silly practical question. With pieces like this scaffold piece, do you pack it up and ship it and reinstall it in another place, or does that get rebuilt from scratch?
Yeah, it gets disassembled and then reassembled, and some of the things wear out, but yeah, it's still going. It's been going for like 3-4 years now.
Does it have like an indefinite schedule of reinstallation, or will you eventually put it in storage, or what happens?
Oh, yeah, it might, I hope to have it installed permanently somewhere. That's would be the goal for that work, in a place that made sense for the content. If not, then it will be disassembled and scrapped. So in that case of that work, there's a lot of ways you can do it. If you have a little bit of money, you can take it down and then donate the parts to, a material salvage or an art school or something like that. If you don't have any money, then you just have a company come in and take it down, and they get to keep the materials. It gets recycled one way or another, but yeah. Doing these giant projects like this, well, this is maybe not giant in comparison to a lot of artists' work nowadays, but yeah, going back to your question about the environment, I think it's important to start, many artists do. Think about the impact of the actual things you're building, So, stop making objects.
Hey, Sam. This may be a silly question because the answer might be that it's articulated in the work, but I'm only asking it because you're not addressing it specifically. But what is your position in relationship to the politics of the subject matter that's presented in the work?
My personal position?
I suppose. There are certain politics that are presented within the work, right? Like the monuments.
Yeah, I'm against Facebook. if that's what you mean. I mean it. I'm against it. But go ahead.
I guess I'm just asking, because when you talk about the work, you're just talking, you're kind of describing it, right?
Yeah.
So you took the monument and then you reconfigured it and you put it in a different place, right? But what does that do? And how is that? Is that something that's a critical gesture? And is that something that you can articulate when you talk about the work specifically?
Well, I mean, my basic position would be that oppression harms the oppressor as well as the oppressed, and in looking at all these historical issues that are about one form or another of conflict, that's something that I guess I would try to bring out, so that in particular with that monuments transposition piece, because there were no monuments dedicated to the military on either side. I excluded those. So basically it's about the collateral damage of the imperialist project. And the whites that were killed were just as much collateral damage as the Indians in that sense. So all those deaths are equal in that sense. And I guess that's my basic feeling in terms of how to deal with these issues, and I guess I think it's just really important, when I was in St. Louis, Mary Lou Cano, the director there, did a presentation where she showed a quote from Jimmy Durham, and it was, I can't remember exactly, but it really captured it. Any memory, any history that we keep repressed and don't deal with and don't discuss, it stays in the present with us all the time. And I guess that's kind of the idea. Like these things, we've never really dealt with slavery and things like genocide and stuff. So it's really about just trying to get some of these ideas into public discourse.
I have a question about the Getty project, because it struck me in so many of the other pieces. I'm over here. It struck me that in so many of the works, it's really about the creation of an image, almost like, and often a kind of collaging of two separate elements to create one sort of very powerful image around which the ideas circulate. So I'm wondering, how was it for you to do a piece in which there was no image, there was no object? It's just completely in the ether. Like, was that an uncomfortable situation for you? Is it something that you'd like to explore in the future, or not?
Yeah. No, I really enjoyed it. I mean, as much as I came to realize I wasn't a social media person, and I think, it was interesting too, because I think the museum is realizing, actually, the Getty Museum is realizing that social media is of a very limited use for what they do. So I think it was a very useful project for them as well. Of course, I wouldn't say that my artist project has bearing on the other kinds of things that the museum does in their use of social media, but I think it was a helpful thing in that sense for them. Because really it's about having an experience with the real things there in the museum and the other people that are there and the people that work there and all that. Whatever you think about what the Getty does. But the immateriality of it I quite enjoyed. In the sense that, like this scaffold project, it's something that's just keeps going. It's a thing in the world that has to be dealt with all the time, and takes energy and time and money and all that. So that was quite nice to did it, it's done, and it's over when it's done. And I think that just in general, the digital realm is it's an area that I've worked a tiny bit, but it's something I would like to do much more of in the future. And that's like, talk about audience, you know, that's a huge audience, potentially. If you do cat videos or something, you know, or what's the latest thing that's got, you know, 2 million views on YouTube, whatever it is. Someday I'll get there.
Sorry. Hi. So when I was looking at your gallows piece, I was thinking of how John Brown was, in some circles, often called like the first domestic terrorist, and so I was thinking about capital punishment and imperialism, and I imagined some of the conversations and challenges that was generated from that piece. But I was curious, what do you think is the role of the artist in generating certain conversations, and the role of the audience in receiving some of these pieces that you, or some of your artwork?
What are the what's the artist's role? Or
Yeah.
In kind of generating discussion?
Yeah.
Well, you know, that's what we do, I think. I mean, I think that's what every artist does in one way or another. It's artworks only really live if we talk about them and think about them and, you know, discuss them. So I think, you know, to me, that's really, you're doing that anyway, no matter what you do. It's just a question of what is it that you want to talk about, and maybe that's what you're asking. I don't, you know, I think that I don't think there's anything particular. I would just say, one, since you have the opportunity to engage a dialogue and a discussion, since you're doing that anyway, why not make it about something significant, important, whatever that is, to the culture, to the people, to the audience. Make it meaningful, that's all. It doesn't have to be about any one thing or another.
I think that's probably a great note on which to end. It's always inspiring, Sam, to hear you talk about your work and the model it offers us for thinking about and looking at the very issues you've talked about. So please join me in thanking Sam Durant. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks all, so many familiar faces. Thank you guys so much for coming out. It's great to see everyone.